Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. A couple of weeks ago, you might have seen our coverage of Intel's Kaby Lake G processor, a combination of a quad-core Kaby Lake CPU with an AMD Radeon RX Vega M GPU and 4GB of HBM2 on a single package. We've already gone through all the performance numbers and game demos you could possibly want. Now let's discuss whether it's actually worth buying the first Kaby Lake G laptop, the Dell XPS 15 2-in-1. As the name of this laptop suggests, we're looking at a convertible laptop here with a 360-degree hinge. You can use it as a giant 15.6-inch tablet or in more useful stand and tent modes. At this size, I don't find the 2-in-1 aspect of this laptop all that useful. Most convertibles I stick to using as a laptop anyway, but when we're talking about a 15-inch system, the size makes some of those other usage modes less practical. The hinge is sturdy and easy to operate though, and there aren't any noticeable compromises that affect the laptop experience. This is still a laptop first and other usage modes second, which is the right approach to take with this sort of device. In terms of build quality, we're looking at the same excellent build as Dell's entire XPS line. You get a beautiful matte metal on the lid and base, along with a soft touch carbon fiber styled keyboard surround. It's a very sturdy laptop thanks to that combination of materials, plus it has a nice premium touch that you really should be getting at this price point. It wouldn't be an XPS laptop without a slim bezel display, so you're getting that here as well. I still think Dell does the best slim bezel laptops out there, and it's awesome to get it in not just the 13-inch form factors, but 15-inch as well. Unfortunately, the trade-off for such slim bezels is the nostril vision camera position below the display, which isn't great for frequent webcam users, but the slimmer bezels do allow the laptop to take up a smaller footprint. And while not a small or particularly portable laptop due to its large 15-inch screen, it's one of the smallest devices you can get in its class. The thickest parts are just 16mm thick, and that tapers down nicely, and overall it weighs just 2 kilograms. Ideally, I'd like to see that weight come down a tad, but you are getting a 75 watt-hour battery inside along with the premium aluminium construction, and both of those things add to the weight. The port selection is pretty lacking on the XPS 15 2-in-1, especially compared to the non-convertible XPS 15. There isn't a single USB-A port on this device. Dell has instead opted for 2 Thunderbolt 3 ports on the left and 2 USB-C 3.1 ports on the right. The USB-C 3.1 ports double as DisplayPort outputs, but there is no commonly used display connector on this device, and while dual Thunderbolt 3 is nice, the lack of USB-A is annoying if you want to use many common peripherals without a dongle. As the market transitions to USB-C, I still think it's critical to include at least one USB-A port, and while the sides are quite thin, I think a slight design revision could have allowed full-size USB here. You also get a 3.5mm headphone jack and a micro SD card slot. Again, it would have made more sense to have a full SD slot here, especially as the laptop is designed for creative professionals. Both a full SD slot and a USB-A port are included with the regular Dell XPS 15, so it's disappointing to see the 2-in-1 cut these features. The keyboard uses Dell's shallower XPS key design used across their 2-in-1 laptops, which provides slightly less feedback than the deeper keys with a longer travel on the non-convertible XPSs. The keyboard here is fine, it's not bad, but it's not particularly satisfying to type on, and I definitely prefer the standard XPS keyboard over this one. It's also a bit disappointing that this 15-inch laptop does not include a numpad, but that does allow the keyboard to take center stage. The trackpad is good, on par with Dell's other XPS laptops, and I like the inclusion of a fingerprint reader in the power button. The nostril vision camera array also supports Windows Hello facial recognition if you prefer that for authentication. The display, it's available in either 1080p or 4K resolutions. Both are 15.6-inch IPS LCD panels, and both include touchscreens. I received the 4K model to review, and it packs 100% Adobe RGB gamut coverage, so it's perfect for content creators that need the extra color space. In typical Dell fashion, this is a professional grade display that includes features designed for creators. Their Premier Color utility allows you to choose between several display modes, including a vibrant mode with proper color management that allows you to get the most out of your display, along with additional modes that can clamp the screen to DCI P3, sRGB, or Adobe RGB depending on your needs. This is super handy if you're using an app that doesn't handle color management well, yet you require those larger gamuts. Without going into a ton of detail, the 4K display here performs well with brightness above 400 nits, a strong contrast ratio of 1660:1, and average delta E's around the 3.0 mark in a default mode when measuring against sRGB. And that can be further tightened by selecting a specific mode, and both the DCI P3 and Adobe RGB modes provide near full coverage of those respective gamuts. So it's a very good display all around. Performance is something I've covered in detail in another video, so I'd highly recommend checking out my review of Kaby Lake G for a full breakdown of how this exact model performs. But I will briefly summarize my findings here quickly for those that just want, a brief overview. The latest Dell XPS 15 2-in-1 9575 comes with an Intel Core i7-8705G in the upper end models or an i5-8305G in the lower models, both of which are 65-watt Kaby Lake G parts with a quad-core CPU and 20 compute unit Vega GPUs. My review unit as configured came with 16GB of DDR4 2400 memory, although 8GB appears to be the standard across most models. That said, like with a lot of Dell systems, you have the option to configure both storage and memory through their website. CPU performance is good, slightly outperforming the last gen Core i7-7700HQ, though falling short of the newer 6-core Coffee Lake laptop CPUs like the Core i7-8750H. The 8705G is also a fair bit faster than 15-watt U-series processors like the i7-8550U, despite both being quad cores, so if you're tossing up between this and something like a Dell XPS 13, the 15-inch 2-in-1 is a decent amount faster. As far as graphics performance is concerned, the Vega M GPU with 20 compute units sits around the same level as an NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1050 or 1050 Ti, so it's great for accelerating compute workloads like Adobe Premiere, while also being capable of gaming at 1080p with medium-ish settings in the latest titles. Fortnite is a great example of a game that runs extremely well on this laptop despite its thinness. All up, Kaby Lake G is a pretty impressive chip, though it can't match the performance offered by the Dell XPS 15 with its combination of a 6-core i7-8750H and GTX 1050 Ti graphics. So if you'd rather ditch the 2-in-1 design and 360-degree hinge for faster internals, the XPS 15 might be more up your alley. My review unit was kitted out with plenty of storage, as it includes a 1TB SK Hynix PC401 NVMe PCIe OEM drive. This SSD is fast without blowing me away, something like the Samsung PM981 we're seeing in a lot of other high-end laptops these days is noticeably faster in sequential reads and writes, although this SK Hynix drive performs very well in random speed tests. Getting the 1TB SSD though is very expensive, so I'd probably stick to 512GB for most buyers. Thermal performance is an interesting one, as the temperatures of the CPU and GPU vary depending on the workload split. For example, if the CPU is the only component being used, it reaches a peak of 85 degrees Celsius. However, if it's being used alongside the GPU in a stress test, the CPU hits just 75 degrees and the GPU 67 degrees. And in gaming, the CPU is a little cooler at around 72 degrees Celsius, while the GPU stays at that same 67 degree figure. These figures are quite good, but it does come at a cost. The cooler isn't particularly quiet, reaching 43.4 dBA in both gaming and video encoding stress tests. That gaming result isn't too bad, but when slamming the CPU in a render, it's quite loud compared to other devices. Surface temperatures were also very hot. The area around the F4 key reached nearly 50 degrees Celsius, and the entire right side of the keyboard was above 45 degrees, including the WASD keys. While gaming, you'll have to put up with the keyboard acting as a bit of a hand warmer there. The XPS 15 2-in-1 does come with a 75 watt-hour battery, which is on the lower end of the battery range for 15-inch ultra portables, but it is still good enough for decent amounts of life. Like a lot of these sorts of systems, the 9575 will give you better battery life than a gaming laptop, even one with a large battery like the Gigabyte Aero 15X, but it won't last as long as a smaller 13-inch device with a 15-watt CPU. Like a lot of modern portable laptops, there's a lot to like about the Dell XPS 15 2-in-1. This machine has a great build, a solid 360-degree hinge, a great display, good performance, and so on. There are a few annoyances here and there, like the lack of a USB-A port and a shallow keyboard, but overall it's a good system that buyers will like. And as far as 15-inch convertibles go, the XPS 15 9575 would be right up there as one of the best. However, I think a lot of prospective buyers would be better off with a non-convertible Dell XPS 15. It's kind of neat to have the 360-degree hinge, but the size of this 15-inch laptop makes it difficult to get the most out of the tablet and other form factors. With 13-inch convertibles, it's a lot easier to make use of the tablet mode as they are smaller and lighter, but the XPS 15 2-in-1 is a 2-kilogram beast and best suited to use on a desk in laptop mode. That's not to say you shouldn't consider the XPS 15 2-in-1, especially if you're an artist that wants to make use of the included pen to draw on the display in its stand mode. I just think for most other professionals, professionals that wouldn't use that feature and would rarely take advantage of the 360-degree hinge, the XPS 15 with its faster processor, larger battery, and wider port selection is a much better option, especially when you consider the XPS 15 is at least $130 cheaper for an equivalent configuration, if not more when the XPS 15 2-in-1 isn't discounted through Dell's website. Speaking of price, the XPS 15 2-in-1 definitely isn't cheap. A model with just the Core i7-8705G, 8GB of RAM, and 256GB of storage will set you back $1,529 right now, down from an MSRP of $1,700. That price quickly jumps to over $1,750 if you want a decent 16GB of RAM and 512GB of storage, while the 4K screen is an additional $400. My review unit as configured with a 1TB SSD is an eye-watering $2,400 US. And if I told you this very unit was 4,200 Australian dollars, which includes more than $600 of Australia tax, you'd probably be even less impressed. That's it for this review of the Dell XPS 15 2-in-1. If you're interested in more in-depth performance numbers, I'd recommend going back and checking our previous coverage of Kaby Lake G. Consider supporting us on Patreon so we can continue to make awesome content, and I'll catch you in the next one.